Last year, the government of Denmark did something quite remarkable, I think. It appointed an ambassador to Silicon Valley, a formal diplomatic platform, not to the United States government, but to a vaguely defined industry with no formal power, political mandate, or organization. Now, if that's not indication enough of just how powerful and influential the global tech industry has become, wait until you hear what Jamie Bartlett has to say. In his new book, The People versus Tech, Jamie argues that the internet is killing democracy, and he proposes solutions for dealing with digital disruption and its far-reaching effects. He's a journalist for The Telegraph in London and director for the Center for the Analysis of Social Media at the British think tank Demos. I hope I said that right. Yes. It's my pleasure to welcome Jamie Bartlett.
Thank you. I was going to say, yeah, what a great hair and beard combination you've got. Fantastic. What a year it's been for technology. I mean, a really difficult year, quite a trying year. In many ways, a wake-up call, I think, for many people about some of the downsides, the negatives of where we are collectively taking all of us. And I'm going to tell you some of those downsides and some of those problems, but it's not all negative. Of course, the title of my book, Why the Internet is Killing Democracy, it's a bit more subtle than that, but the publishers weren't interested in my subtle titles, but I'm sure you will be. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for putting this on, and thank you for having me. So the story of Cambridge Analytica, I'll start a little bit with that. Because I'm sure many of you are thinking, wow, that's not, some of the stuff they were doing was not actually that new or particularly difficult. Wait until they hear about cross-platform targeting and custom audiences. Oh my God, everyone's going to be terrified. Because the truth is, most of us understand very well how all of this technology works, but a lot of people were very surprised. And I imagine some of you were very surprised that so many people seemed so surprised. But the reason I think this story, and I covered it for the BBC, in fact, 9 months ago, and so I'm quite annoyed that everyone was surprised recently and not when my TV show came out about it, but never mind, is I think because it reflects a broader concern that people have about the last 12 months in particular, stories about Russian disinformation, about automation, about trolling, about hate crime. They all seem to be part of the same story. And I think Cambridge Analytica just arrived at a particular moment that sort of encapsulated those concerns. And I think that's quite a good thing, because I think it's a wake-up call for us. And it's not too late to act. The thing that I really worry about, the thing I think you should be worried about, is that we're going through a great techlash, a backlash against technology, and that if it carries on, the risk is that we throw out all the wonderful benefits of technology. If people come to see that the digital technology is a force of oppression somehow, rather than a force of liberation, then we are going to go backwards. And that's the thing we should be worried about and that we should respond to. And I think part of the reason this is happening now is because the great hope in the 1990s, of course, was that technology was going to make politics wiser, kinder, more thoughtful. The idea was that when we were all connected digitally, we'd understand each other far better because we'd have more information. Misunderstanding would be banished, and our politics would be rational and thoughtful. I don't think you need to be a huge skeptic to think that isn't exactly how it's turned out, with the notable exception of, I'm sure, of your own mayor here. In fact, politics has become noticeably more emotional. In many ways, I think the great social media politician of the age is Beppe Grillo. the Italian comedian slash blogger, whose party actually kind of, you can never really tell who actually wins Italian elections, but who kind of won the Italian election recently. He's a perfect example of the way that his movement, the 5-star movement, set up only in 2009 with a blog. It brought millions of people into politics. People that were never engaged in politics before felt that they could break out of this rigid party system, the old hierarchies of how Italian politics always worked. Introduced many more people into the democratic process, allowed millions of Italians to get involved in having a direct say through the 5-star movement blog in how decisions were taken. That's the wonders of digital technology for democracy. But Beppe Grillo is also a comedian. He's quite rude. He's quite aggressive. He called Silvio Berlusconi a psychopathic dwarf. I mean, I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's not very nice. And the politics of the 5-star movement is not really about compromise. It's about argumentation. It's populist. This is the flip side. This is the politics of emotion. And in the UK, one brilliant example of this from us, and I'm sure you have many of your own, is the way that many groups on the radical right have been fantastic early adopters of all things digital, because they understand it's a wonderful way of reaching new audiences and getting their message out there. This is the leader of the far-right group, the English Defence League, which really was not the British Labour Party or the British Conservative Party. The English Defence League was the first political movement that really understood how to use Facebook to start a movement. This group, which for 6 or 7 years did anti-Islam demos up and down the UK, was essentially a Facebook group with a small militant wing that used to protest on the streets. And I think this is the question that I think we need to look at. It's very easy to blame all the tech firms for this stuff, but I don't think any of them want any of this stuff to happen. I see this more of a clash of worldviews, a clash of organizing society. We have a democracy that was built in an analog age, and suddenly we have a new technology that's digital, and the two things are butting heads. And both of them, I think, have to reform in order to find a new settlement. I don't think it's helpful to point fingers and say, it's your fault, Mr. Zuckerberg, you're to blame for all of this. It's a much more structural change to how society is being organized. Which takes me on to this next thing, the great artificial intelligence revolution. I managed to spend, very fortunately, I spent 3 hours, 150 kilometers in the US recently on a driverless truck. That's not me, by the way. That's not me. I haven't degraded so much in the last year. 150 miles in a driverless truck, which at the beginning was it was terrifying. You know, you're charging along at 70 miles an hour, approaching a bend. Oh my goodness me, we're all going to die. Of course, it gracefully takes the corner, and then pretty quickly, novelty gives way to tedium and boredom because American roads are long and straight and nothing happens on them at all. So we did 3 very boring hours in a driverless truck, and I realized, wow, this is really coming. Maybe not taxis in town centers, but truck driving, yes, this is one of those areas which artificial intelligence is completely going to transform the industry within a decade or so. And I think this is giving rise to one of the great moral panics of the 21st century, that we're heading towards a world without work. No one's going to need work anymore because machines will do all of it, which I think is slightly ludicrous. I mean, that's clearly not going to happen. We're going to invent new jobs. We always have done. What we should be worried about instead, though, is what that turbulence in our economy is going to do for the shape of the labor market. The thing that I think we should be concerned about is how the people who understand this technology, that can benefit from this technology, the wonderful people like apparently this truck driver who's on his iPad, how people like that will see dramatic gains in productivity. They'll have a fantastic job. They're probably machine learning specialists. But lots of other people will lose out. There'll be lots of jobs that won't be automated. But will they be jobs in the service sector where it's hard to unionize, where it's very difficult for people to save money? Will the middle class slowly get eroded gently without us barely noticing? This is the great worry that I have, because the middle class is such an important pillar of what makes democracy actually work. And if you erode that, you erode all sorts of other things with it. Who buys the newspapers, joins the political parties, is a member of the parents and teachers associations and the neighborhood watches that keep society ticking along. That's what we need to worry about. When I was in Silicon Valley, I'd say, what about the 3% of Americans that are employed in a driving job in one way or another? Because in some parts of America, trucking is the best paid job for men who leave college without a degree or who leave school without a college degree. What are they going to do? And you know what those people said to me? Oh, they should probably retrain as machine learning specialists or web programmers. Really? I mean, do we really think that's the answer? That's what's going to happen? We need to think carefully about this. Because if anybody thinks that truckers in their 50s that have worked in this industry their whole lives are going to sit back and just take the transformation of their entire livelihoods and culture and happily think, well, don't worry, my great-great-grandchildren will probably be less likely to die in a car accident, so I'm fine, thank you. They're out of their minds. And so it's the transition. We have to make sure that people feel like they're benefiting from these changes. The other thing that people, I think, sometimes forget when it comes to democracy and technology, because we're sometimes blinded by the obvious benefits. Yes, with social media, we get to speak our mind. We democratize the public sphere. More and more people can have their say, and they can connect with each other, and people who never had a voice before, especially minority groups, they can finally get out there and say what they think. That's all brilliant and fantastic and a benefit to democracy. But there are boring things that make democracy actually work too, like a functioning criminal justice system, like a police force that can actually enforce the law. And this worries me greatly too. My first book was about the darknet, this sort of network of websites that are almost impossible, or at least very difficult, to censor and remove from the internet and where you visit with an anonymous web browser. I'm not going to go into all of that. But this is a sort of corner of the sort of lawless corner of the internet that I think is going to grow greatly in future. I think it's going to get harder and harder for the authorities to actually enforce the law online. So the darknet has all these sites, some of which are wonderful. The New Yorker has a place for you to submit stuff there. You have all the WikiLeaks cache on a darknet site, whatever you think of them. If you don't want to buy my book or whatever, don't worry about it. You can go straight to one of these piracy sites and download it for free on the darknet. I don't mind. There's, of course, lots and lots of, I'm not going to ask if anyone has ever been to this website before, but lots and lots of anonymous marketplaces where things and illegal things are bought and sold. You have commercially available hacking services. You have all sorts of terrorist and extremist propaganda. And Facebook even has a darknet site now, by the way, because they think it's actually safer. It's a safer way of going on the internet in some parts of the world. So while you have some wonderful benefits to all of this, you also have a real problem for the authorities, which is the existence of marketplaces that are more or less impossible to shut down. This one was shut down, but there's now 20 or 25 that are very similar, that all sorts of illegal stuff is bought and sold with relative impunity. And for people that follow this sort of thing, you can tell this is an old screen grab, because 1 gram of cocaine does not cost about $20,000 in Bitcoin. But and these places are constantly emerging and evolving and changing and getting harder to shut down every time we have a breakthrough because of the spread of powerful public key encryption. They're very, very difficult to actually shut down. So all sorts of stolen credit card details and sort of advice on how to how to scam websites and stuff is publicly available. And I think the future is going to be in more and more of this. Decentralized, encrypted, extremely difficult to shut down parts of the internet. Now, what happens when it suddenly becomes apparent that there are parts of the net where the writ of the law does not run? When there's no judge, when there's no police force that can remove certain content from the internet, the end of censorship. How will people feel about that? At the moment, something like 1/4% of all digital crime results in a prosecution. And yet over 50% in many countries of crime now committed is online. People are going to get frustrated by this. They're going to say, we need to fix this, we need to end this, we need to shut this down, what are we going to do about it? What are you, the politicians, going to do to fix this? So this is my great concern, that we are, there's a lot of dystopias to worry about at the moment, you know? Choose your dystopia. What's the correct one to fear? I don't think it's an imminent societal collapse and the emergence of some crypto-anarchic paradise of cryptocurrencies and virtual nations. I also don't think it's a sort of luxury communism where everything is done by machines and people are given a universal basic income to write poetry and go fishing or whatever, which I think is another form of dystopia, by the way, but some people seem to think that's a good thing. I think it's something a lot more familiar and a lot more basic, which is people come to lose faith in the idea of democracy as a system that actually works for them, that can provide wealth, that can provide meaningful jobs, where the law can be enforced, where the voice of the people can actually be heard. And in those circumstances, of course, what happens is that authoritarianism starts creeping in. Powerful leaders turn up saying, we're going to fix this. Here are the solutions. We're going to smash this technology up. Or we're going to use this technology to enforce the law. So you know that Bitcoin thing that everyone thought was brilliant and liberating? Right, we're going to have a government-run Bitcoin where everybody's transactions all the time are going to be recorded because it's going to be another way for us to raise taxes. Highly authoritarian way of doing things, but one that I think might become more and more popular if people lose faith in democracy. And here's the bad news. This is a survey that was done very recently, a couple of years ago, asking people whether they thought it was essential to live in a democracy, and they broke it down by decade of birth. And so people that were born in the 1930s, in many countries, it was 60, 70, 80% of people thought yes. So people who are in their 80s think, yes, it is essential to live in a democracy. Every decade that you come forward, that number goes down. People born in the 1980s. So we're not talking about spotty teenagers. I mean, I'm born in 1979, so I think people who are born in the 80s, I still have in my head that they're like teenagers or something. But there are people in their 30s who are about to run the damn place. And, I mean, Denmark's not in here, but Sweden, obviously, I mean, you Scandinavians are always so bloody happy about everything. And so you're winning on this chart, but the direction of travel is clear. People are losing faith in democracy as a system. This is what we should be worried about. This is the dystopia. And I think more and more people might look to technology as being the reason for this. And that's what we have to turn around. And that's what I think we can turn around. The last 6 months, I think, have been a very useful wake-up call for people to understand that it's not all one-sided. There are problems here. And that means it's going to be down to people in this room especially to work out a number of questions. How do we make sure that the benefits of technology are getting spread evenly across society so people don't start to reject it and think that it's a force of oppression rather than a force of liberation? How can we build civic technology that creates all the wonderful benefits of people being engaged in politics but doesn't descend easily into tribalism and name-calling? How can we use fantastic technologies like blockchain to help transparency, but without creating a lawless space where the writ of the king doesn't run? These are questions for all of us. They're questions, I think, especially for you. And I like to think of the last 6 months, really, as a really good thing for this industry. I've worked in this industry for a decade. I actually run a center that specializes in machine learning. And I think this is a really good opportunity to reflect on all of these things. These recent stories, they are canaries in the mine. It's generally quite wise to listen to the canary in the mine, because where we are at the moment with the technological revolution and the way that people have been reacting to it recently, we are just at the beginning, aren't we? I mean, the great explosion of data that is about to happen, the incredible increases in the power of machine learning, the remarkable continued spread of smart devices around the world, the spread of public key encryption, these things are just at the beginning. And so if we don't take the lessons now and start thinking about how we design these services now, what I fear is we're heading for a great tech backlash, even more than we have now, and then all the wonderful benefits that we enjoy and that we see won't be shared by everyone. They won't be shared by anyone because they will be rejected. And that's the challenge for us today. And thank you all very much for listening. How was that on the time?
Good, perfect. We have time for just a single question so that we can keep the program on track.
Make sure you get a picture of us two with our someone.
British influence, you know? Yeah? Jamie, we've got a few questions in on Slido, and I'll kind of try to make an amalgam of them, right? And that was, you know, what can we as individuals do to address this tech lash? Should we delete our Facebook accounts?
I think one of the things that we need, I mean, it depends who you are, because if you're in the business of designing technology or making technology, then if you're in the business of Internet of Things, then obviously you have to think very carefully about the basic security measures that you're putting in as default. That's one of the obvious problems. If you are just a sort of citizen who's worried about this, I'm very excited by the way that the last 3 or 4 years has seen an incredible explosion of civic tech. People trying to work out how can we use this tech in maybe a not-for-profit way so that we can communicate better with our representatives. Or we can come up with ways of allowing government spending to be tracked more closely. Because clearly democracy needs an upgrade as well. It's not all complaining about tech. The problem, as I've said, is that we have one old system and one new system, and both of them need to change. For each of us individually, though, I think one of the ways that I look at this, one of the kind of ideas to save democracy is for us to recognize that the decisions we make online, the things we click on, that we swipe, that we share, they're political decisions. We are creating mega monopolies through the things that we do because we love those services and we use them all the time. But we can also make other decisions. We can be conscious about the things that we put online. We can use different services. And I think of it a little bit like fair trade. You know, we're the great fair trade revolution of maybe 2 decades ago, where people started realizing, well, my purchasing decisions can actually make a difference here. I think it's the same now, but with your data, like who you share it with, and being a sort of conscious user of that.
Great. Jamie, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
When you came in, you could choose whether or not you were a tech optimist or pessimist with the coffee cups, right? And so my question is after hearing Jamie Optimist, did that make you rethink your cup of joe? Well, behold, tech does not only come in bitter grinds, right? It also can be delightfully sweet with a round aftertaste.
I'm absolutely optimistic all the time, yet staying on the ground. There's a lot of things to consider and a lot of things we need to optimize, but I'm very optimistic.
Same thing here. I'm very optimistic. I think that digitalogy is going to be our future, and it's going to be a great help for the world. But we definitely have to see that there is some challenges as well, and some dark sides we have to keep watching.
For me, it's quite complicated because there are both good sides and bad sides, and the internet and the technology could make the world a better place, but also I'm not so sure about how AI would help us, or if it will help us, or if it will do bad things.
Or when the machine are going to take over.
Oh yeah, exactly, the Terminator scenario.
I think Internet Week Denmark is always this event that brings not just the newest information about technology, but also the newest trends about what is it we have to think about in terms of digitalization. And I think it was really interesting, the discussion of whether all these digital technologies are bringing us good, or we should look into the other side.
I think it's very inspiring to hear all about the digital way of news and the future, and I also think that it's very good that we talk about the danger of the digital thing, that we also keep in mind that it's not only good things happening. Every time there's a good thing happening, there are also some bad things happening, and we have focus of them as well. So pretty good, a nice opening, and I'm looking forward for the rest of the week.
I think it was really interesting, and it kind of gave you a sense of where things are heading in the future, and I really liked attending it. I really liked the part where the speaker told us how technology could influence the future and the future of democracy, and how it will influence the world. Actually,
I think that was the same part about how the challenge is with the democracy, and how we have to look into a globalized world that actually is not only each country that can do anything in the democracy, that we are influenced by the whole world actually right now, because of the internet is global. So I think was very interesting and very inspiring.
I think on top of what these two beautiful gentlemen said, I would like to add, for me it was really inspiring how do we find presence in this digital jungle. And I think it's becoming more and more interesting. I was sitting at one of the last lines, and I can see more than 50% of the people were using some sort of a digital device while watching a really interesting keynote. And I think it's a really interesting way. How do we find our presence and our balance within this jungle of digitalization?